Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Shinobi 3. In the last part we started off the game and now we're heading into Stage 4, Destruction. All of the stages in this game have subtitles for some reason. I don't know why. With that said, the start of Stage 4 is similar to the start of Stage 2 in that we're on a vehicle section, except in this case, it's not a horse, it's a surfboard that I presume has some sort of propeller system under it. Yeah, that looks like it has a propeller. Or propulsion, rather. By and large, it controls the exact same. You're not controlling your forward movement. Instead, you're controlling just where you are in the screen on a left to right basis. And your goal here is to take out enemies before they hit you. I recommend staying towards the left third, but not all the way to the left, because there is the occasional enemy that'll sneak back from the right, like this one guy's about to, while firing items, or firing bullets at you. The warning signs in this version of the stage instead aren't fences, though. They are rocks that act as ramps. And you want to use those ramps, as if you jump off them at the right time, you get a good enough jump arc, usually allowing you to get more kunai, more shurikens, the occasional power-up, or even an extra life in, I think, 1 or 2 cases. Will say, though, I love the music here. Mind you, this game's soundtrack in general is fantastic. In fact, one of the boss themes, I particularly think it's the boss theme of Stage 2, this stage, and I think Stage 6. I have distinct memories of hearing elsewhere because it was used as the opening theme for a podcast I listened to for a good year or so before they eventually switched to Cyber Peacock's theme from Mega Man X4. At the end of this section, though, we do have to deal with a mini-boss, particularly one of the tiny robots in the background. With that said, this mini-boss is pretty straightforward. It'll charge across the screen. It'll shoot its gun at you. Not much to it. It can also drop mines in the water that move towards you the moment they make contact with the water because, you know, momentum. Additionally, whenever it fires its shots airborne, you want to move the moment the projectile stops because it aims for where you are the moment the projectile stops, I believe. With that said, as long as you keep up the offensive, this thing dies pretty quickly. It also starts to resemble a certain Gundam mech, but I referenced that enough, honestly. And now we're in Not Oil Ocean Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. The biggest thing to note about this particular section is that anything you see that is water is actively a bottomless pit. You can't swim in this game, so try and stay high, hang off the pipes while you can, and just generally stick higher to level design. Now, something that is a bit interesting in this game compared to some other games I've played is that we know there is an actively different version out there that was, by and large, a beta they basically scrapped and restarted development as a base from. I believe there's a playable ROM of it out there somewhere, but I've never played it myself, but looking into it, it's, by and large, what they used for a lot of like early magazine covers of the game, different stages, graphics are very different. There's a puzzle game in there, I think. It's just generally a less polished version of the game that's also, I think, entitled the Super Shinobi 2, which, by and large, I think supposed to be a way of stating that this game initially was meant to be more of a direct sequel to Revenge of the Shinobi. Which, you know, I always find prototypes of games cool. Like, I think they just recently found a earlier revision of Final Fantasy 1 on carts, and I eat that kind of shit up. With that said, there are notably, speaking of hidden stuff or secrets, there are a couple of cheat codes in this game, or general secrets in general. For instance, if you go into the options menu on the title screen and you select these songs, He Runs, Japonesque, Shinobi Walk, Sakura, and Getufu, in that order, you will, I think, trigger just straight-up invincibility in the game, which, you know, that's handy. Similarly, if you set the amount of shurikens to 0 in the options menu, and then set the sound effects option to shuriken, and highlight it and keep it there for a while, the 0 eventually changes to an infinity on the shurikens, meaning you don't have to worry about running out of shurikens ever. I honestly find playing the game like that fun as it is because it activates the Mega Man portion of my brain, to be frank, and that makes me go, wee! Additionally, speaking of shurikens, I believe if you complete a stage without using any shurikens, period, you get an extra 30,000 points added to your score, and well, that's just fine and dandy. Speaking of cheat codes, though, there's a very interesting one in this game. For those who don't know, the Genesis did have a 6-button controller variant that on top of the A, B, and C buttons also had X, Y, and Z, which I believe became the main controller more or less for the Saturn? Most games didn't use it until after Street Fighter 2, I think Special Champion Edition on Genesis, and even then it was usually just fighting games that used it, period. But this game does have support for it, but it's locked behind a cheat code. In order to use it, you need to have a 6-button controller in controller port 1 and a standard Genesis controller in controller port 2. What you do then is you highlight options on the title screen, hold mode on controller 1, and up and C on controller 2. And at that point, you press start on controller 1 to open the options menu. To confirm you did this successfully, the options text, I believe, changes to option. At that point, the game uses 6-button controls. And it gives functions that are locked to holding buttons like guard or the melee buttons separate, or melee attacks separate buttons. For instance, pressing A at that point is guard, B is slash, so your melee weapon, C is jump, X will use the ninjutsu, and Y and Z will throw your shuriken. With that said, time for the next boss, which is the bigger robot we saw back in the first third. Best way to fight this thing is stick on the left side of the screen. The first phase, it will fire its missiles, which home into you, or its main cannon, which you can just straight up duck under. Or I think you might even be able to block it. But phase 2 is a little bit different in that it has the gun again, but it does different things with it. Namely, it does machine gun firing at, I think, 2 to 3 shot intervals that I believe you can block, but my best strategy is to just try and tank the damage if I can't jump over it. Phase 3 is just the missiles, and your target here is the weird shield. And it can also, I think, just throughout the latter half of the fight in general, as you can see, try to charge into you and make you fly into the missiles. But you can use that to actively, like, jump kick into it, though I think cause some damage. Also, watch out, it has a giant screw you beam. I forget that attack a lot, because usually this fight's dead by now, I'll be real. With that said, I should note, the boss is about to die. At this point, it's taking visual damage, and I think by the time you do the 4th explosion on it, it's just outright out of commission. You might notice, or at least very keen-eyed people will notice, between this stage and the next stage, my score marker changes after the point clear. There is a reason for this. My original footage for stages 5, 6, and 7, which are the rest of the stages in the game, corrupted. So I had to re-record the latter part of the game. I tried to make it as even as possible. In fact, I even looked back at my stage 4 footage and got my kunai, my shuriken, I keep saying kunai, to the same amount, I believe. Because let's see, 384, 384, we're good. The only thing that actively changed was my live, or no, not even my live, it's just my score. With that said, I mentioned before that stage 3 is my least favorite. Stage 5 is my contender for second least favorite, if not my least favorite for its boss alone. As this stage is dangerous and it's also very long. Because it's built up into the most individual sections, and there's a lot of traps here to take you out. Be it exploding gas canisters, landmines that if you're on them for longer than like half a second will actively detonate, watch out for that. Or just in general, a lot of enemies who want you dead. Also, I think in the beta I mentioned earlier, this background is used for something. With that said, I will admit, this first section is dangerous, but it's also one of my favorite stages in the game because it's just a straightforward path. And it feels really good just to be running and gunning my way through this, so to speak, because one thing I love about this game is that it's the closest thing we got to an action platformer of this style that was super good, almost the entire Super Nintendo and Genesis generation, really? Because, yeah, we got, like, Ninja Gaiden Trilogy, but we didn't get a new Ninja Gaiden from my memory at all this generation of consoles, unless it was, like, on, like Game Boy and shit like that. I think a modern Ninja Gaiden on the Super Nintendo could have been tight. But we didn't get one, and that makes me sad. This is the closest we got, and it makes me wish we got more games like this on this generation. I mean, yeah, we got a couple, but what? Barring this, what do we get? Maybe the Mega Man X games could be considered something like this. I'm struggling to think of others. It's rough to think about the Sega Saturn, because where does that belong in terms of generation stuff? Is that with the N64? I think it is. The 32X is just kind of a disaster in that regard. Honestly, it's like I brought up, I think, back in The Messenger. These kind of action platformers are some of my favorite games to play in terms of just straight up genre, and I wish we got more of them in a lot of regards. Because usually when games try to do like the retro callbacks, they go for like Metroid, Mega Man, straight up Sonic or Mario platformers, and what else? I said Metroid, Mega Man. No, actually, no, that's about most of them. Castlevania, no, there's one there too. We don't get many Ninja Gaiden likes. Like the Messenger and I guess like Oni Ken are some of the big ones we've gotten for this. Maybe Contra likes as well now that I think about it, because we got Blazing Chrome recently. Either way, mini boss. This is more or less a more aggressive version of the mini boss we fought in the first third of stage 4. With that said, most of its attacks can be nullified just by holding the block button. My best advice, though, whenever it does its dash attack, is to do a jump kick to avoid damage and do some extra damage along the way. With that said, prioritize dodging if you can, because like I've said, Shinobi games are at their easiest when you take your time because you're more absorbing what's going on around you. With that said, I won't deny there is a certain element of satisfaction in these games to going very, 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 very fast. With that said, this stage is the antithesis of that, as the entire way this next part of the stage is going to work is that there are bombs we have to detonate in the boxes in order to detonate parts of platforms to progress onwards. I don't like this stage because despite the game, even when I say like take your time being a thing as like a main strategy, the game's generally still fast-paced even if you take your time. This stage just spits in the face of that. Also, a little thing there that I haven't mentioned yet, like, oh no, I did mention it. The running dash, you have a little bit of momentum when you finish it. You can use that to slide over small pits like that. The game the game requires it, I think, once in the final stage. And that's because the final stage in general is some of the tightest platforming I've ever seen and or done. With that said, you can do it there to get a little bit of a bonus treasure trove of items, be it extra shurikens and extra life, I think even. This game does have some secrets hidden throughout it. I think I missed one in stage 1 where you jump above one of the ropes you climb. The only reason I didn't go back to re-record stage 1 is because, honestly, after the footage corrupting, I didn't want to do anything beyond what I needed to in terms of recording. Plus, that would mean if I re-recorded stage 1, I'd have to re-record stage 2 and 3, and I was only feeling like re-recording the stages I needed to, really. I don't like when my footage corrupts. It doesn't happen too often, thankfully, but when it happens, it makes me upsetty. Then there's the weird recordings that corrupt after the fact, now that I think about it. Like, I know when I originally uploaded Mega Man Battle Network 3, like episodes, I think 6 through 11? I'm only thinking about this in particular because I'm archiving my footage onto an external more recently. Even my, like, super old LPs. They had a lot of weird artifacting that I think can be compared to some stuff you can see, I think, in the final uploads of Final Fantasy IV. It's rough. I don't like it when that shit happens. Technical errors suck. Also, something else I forgot that also helps with the speedrunning. I don't know why this came to my memory now of all times. I guess it's because I was just talking about it. But the running slash you can do by, double tapping and then pressing the attack button. There are actually some invincibility frames to that attack which allow you to avoid certain projectiles. It's not the most reliable thing, but you can use it in very sparse situations to easily avoid projectiles, and I think even some versions of touch damage. With that said, I would still recommend, shurikening when you can. Mind you, it's not like lives are hard to come by in this game. As you can see, I have 8 at this point. And even then, some of those are found in levels. Some of those, I think, are gained through points. I want to say in this game it's another 50k, or no, it's every 50k points, I think, is an extra life. And I always appreciate games that do that when lives were very prevalent. Obviously, as time has progressed, lives have become less and less prevalent. I'd say very few games still have an argument for them. Like, honestly, despite me liking Mega Man 11, the only reason I think that game has lives is that they were, a big thing in that series. It's part of the identity. Whereas games like The Messenger obviously opted to just give you infinite tries. Same with the more modern Rayman games and shit. I don't mind lives as a modern gameplay mechanic as long as the game and its difficulty stages are designed around continues and game overs. Speaking of which, I didn't talk about it as well, but this game has active difficulty selects in the menu, obviously. I think I'm playing on normal mode. On easy, you start with 9 lives. On normal, I think you start with 2. And on hard, I think you start with 2, but have a reduced health bar. And I think that also influences the amount of continues you have on a game over. With that said, I usually play the game on normal anyway, so I don't remember. I think I maybe played this game through on hard twice at the most. Because it's, honestly, I think the game is hard enough on normal mode as it is. It's a very hard but fair, whereas with the extra damage, with the reduced health, I feel the damage enemies do is a bit rough on hard mode. And I don't think it changes the ending at all. At most, it might do the thing Shadow Dancer Genesis did, where it changes the to be continued on the ending screen to the end on hard mode at best. Oh, you know what? Speaking of which, I mentioned my past with this game. This was actually the first Shinobi game I played. I was in my early days of emulation, back when I was first experimenting with Kega Fusion after my brother gave me like a thumb drive containing, I think, FCEU Ultra, the NES emulator, and if not every NES game, all the ones people care about, so maybe a good 30% of the library. No, actually, maybe closer to 60%. There were a lot of games on there. That was where I did a lot of my big NES experimentation on games that we didn't have growing up. And then games I thought I first played through that, but then realized, oh no, we had the card of that growing up. It was just in the other box no one cared about. Like, that's where we had our cartridge of, I think Narc was the name of it, the anti-narcotics game where you played as basically as vice cops with a vengeance for against drugs, blowing shit up. I think it was in some JonTron video years ago. I forget. I don't really watch JonTron much anymore. In fact, honestly, my game watching stuff on YouTube has not fallen by the wayside. There's still plenty of people I watch a lot of. I just usually go back to rewatch either some oldies on YouTube nowadays, like a certain vlog channel that's been going for over 4,000 days, or I don't know, what podcast am I listening to at this point? It's rough. As you get older, time becomes less and less of a thing you have between jobs, other hobbies you might have, like I've been streaming on Twitch recently and shit like that. Life is a thing. With that said, we are now on to, without a doubt, my least favorite boss in the game, if not the boss of Stage 3, Mecha Godzilla. This fight is rough for one main reason: the debris that randomly falls from the sky. I don't think there's a pattern to it at all. The boss only has 2 attacks. Outside of it walking, it can fire its green chest beams on you, which each one individually tracks onto where you are when it fires, and a fire breath attack that has some pretty good range, but you can always tell when it's going to do it because it's when it roars. This fight is also split into 2 phases. As you damage the head, it glows more and more red, but eventually the head does detonate, and it's just gone at that point. And what's left in its place is a tiny dome that you have to target. At that point, the fire breath attack is gone, but there are instead 2 variants of the green energy ball attack. The one we see already, of course, but also one that fires all 3 balls at once, meaning you need to probably double jump over it. With that said, even though I don't do it too much because it's mostly a thing for if you're using the 6-button control method, you can stand on Mecha Godzilla's hands, and that can open it up for close range attacks. Also, that's the Karyu attack. It's a screen nuke, like I mentioned. That's the same one we've been seeing since Revenge of the Shinobi. Yeah, that fight, I made it look relatively easy, even though I took a ton of damage during it. But that fight is rough. I would argue the only fight potentially rougher than that, and that's not the Stage 3 boss, is the final boss, for obvious reasons, I would hope. Either way, with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're doing the last 2 stages. See you guys then.